Hello everybody, welcome to Mistake Man. This is going to be part 2 of my USS Voyager build of the 1/670 scale USS Voyager. In part 1 of the video, I kind of took a tour of the kit and started working on cutting out the windows. I finished doing all of the window work. In this video, I'm going to get started adding the photo etch details to the kit, and there are a handful of raised panel lines on this kit that I'm going to remove and re-scribe as recessed panel lines. Anyway, that's what's ahead. So first off, let's start talking about the photo etch. As I mentioned in the previous video, I bought the photo etch set from Green Strawberry that you see here for the Revell 1/670 USS Voyager, which also works for the monogram version of that kit that I'm building here. I do like this photo etch set. It's got quite a lot of parts. And most of them really are just little improvements to details. We've got the little transporter emitter pads, which, there are decals for those, but just giving them a little bit of texture and relief to them might make them just look a little bit better. And then just some improvements in the details, especially on the bridge. We've got a nice section that goes on top of the bridge, plus all the little pieces that go in those kind of brown colored spots. The original kit has some detail there, but it's a little bit, a little bit thick and bulky. And I believe there's lights that come out through those rectangle, well, not really rectangles, kind of close curved shapes around the outside there. I believe there's lights that are supposed to come through there, as if they're like skylights or windows in the top of the bridge. And then they're supposed to have frames in it like this, like the photo etch piece has those little frames. But those are not molded into the kit, so it just improves the detail and the look of this. And then all the detail on top of the bridge here is just really kind of thick and chunky the way they've molded it, where it really ought to be quite a bit thinner than that. So the photo etch replaces that detail and just gives you a nice thinner look for that piece, plus all the little pieces that go on top. Those are separate little pieces in here. There's well, let's open it up. There's a couple of window templates for some additional windows that are not a part of the molded in plastic, and those are, I know, right here along the side of this upper deck here, deck 1. There might be some along here. I think that's probably where the other ones are. Yeah, I think those ones go along the side there. And then those are the ones that are along deck 1. I finished all the windows on, well, the whole ship really. All that I had left was half of this top of the primary hull. That's now all done. And as you can see, I've also done quite a bit of work on the photo etching, at least on the top of the primary hull. I just started working on it, got into a groove, and before I knew it, I'd gotten quite a bit done. A lot of these photo etch parts are intended to replace existing details in the plastic of the original mold. And in a lot of places on this model, I don't think it would look right to just place the photo etch piece on top of the existing detail, the raised detail, especially for things like these transporter emitters. So for example, here's transporter emitter pads on the aft portion of the ship. You can see that they're braced up quite a bit. If you were to place the photo etch piece on top of that raised detail, in a lot of places they're not even the same size. These are pretty close, but the ones on the top of the primary hull, these original ones were quite a bit smaller than that. Same with the ones here on the front. They were smaller than what the photo etch piece is. But even on this one, you can see, even if I line that up well enough that you can see, if you don't remove that raised detail, then the photo etch piece just ends up looking like it's floating above the surface of the hull. And that's not really a look that I want to go for here. So I did that on these transporter emitters on the here. I did remove those, and these kind of raised sensor bands or whatever these are supposed to be. And then that feature there, I removed the original raised detail. And it's quite a bit of work. I ended up using this little rotary tool with kind of a, I don't know if it's exactly diamond, but it's a diamond-like grinding bit on the tip of that. And I've got a couple different shapes of those. This is the one that I used for gouging out the backs of the windows. Here, that's what I used. And so the round one was great for that, but it wasn't really good for removing all these flat features. And so I went with more of a kind of this long cone shaped. I just run the side of the bit along the surface, and I can remove more and leave it more flat than if I were to use the spherical bit. And it took a while. I went carefully, just cognizant of the fact that if I slip up, I can gouge up the hull, and that's just more work I'm making for myself and having to fix that kind of stuff later. The part that took the most time was definitely this part on the back portion of the bridge deck, deck 1, because the existing model has all of these raised features molded into it. And I would say that this is one area where I would be on the fence, or at least I would caution you to maybe consider whether it's worth the time of removing all those raised features just to basically replace them with something that's slightly thinner. That's definitely one area you could forego all of that work and it would still look just fine, I think. The only thing that I really don't like about this is that I now have an edge along the top here that I'm going to have to deal with. So I'm going to have to use some putty and a lot of sanding and smoothing to make that edge disappear. So not really looking forward to that. Oh, and one thing that I did have to do is once I got this piece on here, after I'd removed all the raised detail from the molded plastic, when I stuck this piece on, it was a little bit too big in some spots, and the metal and the brass overhung the existing plastic edge, either all the way or enough that it was sticking out over at least where the radius is, where that kind of curved part of the surface bends down. The brass was just sticking out over that and overhanging, and I did not like the way that looked. So I did have to spend quite a bit of time filing this edge back in a lot of places to try and get that to at least back far enough that I can fill in that edge with some putty and hopefully smooth it out. Like I said, if you're not too bothered by how thick those original details are, then it's probably not worth doing all the work to put that in there. There's also this piece for the bridge. I really like the way that detail looks. It's definitely much better than the original. And then there's these little, almost like window-shaped things here. I'm not sure if those are supposed to be lit or not. I thought I remember seeing in some image that those were lit up as if they were windows, just some white light coming up from them. I have to do a bit of research to see if I'm just remembering that wrong or if it really does show up that way in the show. There's not a lot of shots where you see the ship from directly above. Usually, you're at an angle like that or coming from below. So, but I decided to go ahead and cut that out, grind out those portions to let some light through there. I think I'm going to like the way that looks, so I decided to do that. I also did cut out these portions for the windows here and did grind them out from behind, same as I did for the rest of the windows. Now the photo etch on these windows does have the the division between each of the windows as part of the photo etch brass, but I thought that might look a little weird right up here in front, where that portion would just look extra thin. And so I did leave a little bit of plastic. As you can see there, it's that thickness there is because I left some plastic behind. I did try to grind out or cut out and smooth out those bits of plastic so they're really quite thin in this direction, so that they hide behind the brass. But I do think that's going to end up looking better from the side. And these photo etch pieces do have this little portion above the windows cut out. There's no brass in that spot there. So I don't know if the intention is to have that also be cut out like a window, but from what I could tell from reference photos of the studio model and the CGI model, just shots of the ship in the show, it doesn't really look like that is a part of the window. It just looked like that is just part of the hull, and so I left that. Alright, the other major thing I did on this is these docking ports on both sides and on the front. There's several photo etch pieces that get stacked together to make these docking ports, and in order to get them in there and to be flush, you do have to, well, I decided to cut out a portion of that so that it's going to sit flush. And there are some gaps around there I'm going to have to fill in, probably just with some sheet styrene, and fill in the top here so that I can sand that over and have it blend in with that curve along the top of the saucer edge here. And there are these tiny holes right here. There's 4 of them that they are actual holes in the photo etch, and I don't know if these are actually lit up on the studio model or not, but I decided to go ahead and see if I can get some red light to come through those. So I cut it out. I cut out the model in the back here so that the light that is going to be inside the hole here that's lighting up the windows, hopefully some of that will come through. I'll just put some clear red paint on the back here to get those to show red. I'm not too sure how noticeable that's going to be once it's all said and done, because these holes are really quite tiny. I don't know how much light's going to come through there, but I figured it was worth a try. I do regret actually cutting out completely this back portion, because it really made it hard to support this photo etch piece, and it's only glued on 3 sides, and I really didn't need to cut it out completely, and I did that on both sides of the hull, and then I realized that I really didn't need to do that. So for the front one, I actually just, all I need to do is just drill out some holes that line up with those tiny little holes in the brass piece. It's kind of hard to see. There we go. Anyway, so I drilled some holes just to let the light through, and then that way it left me quite a bit more material to actually fasten this brass piece onto the hull. So that's most of the photo etch work on the top of the primary hull. There are a couple of extra lifeboats that are missing from the original mold, that go on the back here. There's 2 on this side and 2 on the other side. Still got to put those on. There are still quite a few parts. I think there's like 10 photo etch parts that go on this part of the auxiliary deflector, and I've still got to do those. One other bit of customization I've done here is add these windows to these top couple of decks here. There were no features at all in the original mold of this kit. And the Green Strawberry Photo Etch kit does come with some templates for these windows. The main issue with these is that they've got the windows going the wrong direction. The windows are supposed to be oblong, but unlike the rest of the model, where they're tall and narrow, these ones are short and wide. And the green strawberry photo etch has them going the wrong way. And so I didn't really like that, so I decided to tweak that. The other issue with these is they don't put the windows in exactly the right spot. So if you see there, if you compare the windows that I actually drilled to where the photo etch template shows, they're off a little bit. So this one was not too bad. These ones were off a ways, and then these two were pretty close. So, and then for the top here, they were off quite a bit as well. I did use the template to, for the size of the window. Essentially, I turned this on its side and then used that to mark the size of the window. In fact, on this other one here, you can see where I bent the ends to help me kind of wrap that around so that I could use that to mark the size of the windows. So I'd laid, and this was before I put this top brass piece on here. I laid the template against that and kind of held it in place till I got it right where I wanted it. Got a little bit of black paint and then just kind of dabbed in through that cutout in the template, and that left behind a nice black rectangle that was right size and in the right place. And then I went and scratched around it with my hobby knife because I knew the paint it could be easily rubbed off. And so I scratched the outline into the plastic and then went in with my drill bit just like I did with these, drilled it out, and then finished cutting it out with gouged out the backs with the rotary tool, and then finished cutting the nice crisp corners with the hobby knife. And then even weirder, on these two windows right here, they're not even the same shape as these. So not only are they not vertical, but they're also not as wide as these. And so I just had to kind of custom fit those, cut them out to what looked about right for those windows. I do like this little detail from the Photo-etched kit. The original kit had nothing back here. It was just smooth all the way across. And so I had to cut out a rectangle for the little hatch on the back. For those, for this hatch in the back and then for the docking ports along the side, there's not a whole lot of surface area for the glue to bond to. And so I did end up using the CA glue like I did for all of the other photo etch pieces, but since there's so little surface area for that to bond to, I was really concerned about the fragility of that bond with just the CA glue. So I did go back in after the CA glue had set and it was held in place good enough. I went back in with some canopy glue and just kind of filled in around the edges on that just to give that a larger surface to bond. Hopefully that'll end up being a little bit stronger, a little bit tougher, and that won't hopefully crack out when it's done. I've also finished the photo etch for this kind of spine that runs down the back of the ship. It goes right there. And these photo etch pieces replace the original molded in torpedo launchers. And the originals looked pretty much like what they do here on the forward torpedo launchers. Just kind of, they look basically like that, except right there. And then there was a little bit of raised detail around them, some of these panels. I don't think the top ones were there, but the side ones were. They didn't have the kind of ribbing detail on them though. So anyway, I just ground those out, and I do want to light these torpedo tubes. And so I did cut out the plastic in the back so the light can get through there. And I didn't really have a good way to attach this folded over piece onto this flat piece. There's basically just this edge that goes around where the photo etch pieces come together. And I didn't really think that that was going to hold well if I bonded that with just CA glue like everything else. And so what I did was I actually got this piece that was folded around. This is all one piece. So these kind of trapezoidal sides, this top rectangle, and then folded down the front is the portion with the just kind of frame around the exit of the launcher. Here it is in the instructions, so you can see kind of what that looks like. Here's unfolded, and then here's what they look like folded, and they just glue onto there. But they really just have just that really, really thin edge of brass that is mating up against this flat piece here. So there's not a lot of surface area for that to really grab onto. And so what I did instead was I took that piece before I glued it on, I flipped it around, and then I just filled it with UV resin until it was kind of domed up over this opening in the back. And then, of course, cured it with the UV light. And then just used some sandpaper to sand that flat. And then that gave me basically that whole flat surface area to help me glue onto the flat piece there. So I'm much more confident about the strength of that bond. And also, I think the resin is going to act as kind of a light pipe. Because the light basically has to come up through and then make a almost 90-degree turn to come out the tube there. And so I think it's going to act like a light pipe. There you go. You can kind of see. So yeah, I think that that worked out fine. The next part that I'm working on is for the impulse engines on the pylons. Each pylon is broken into two parts, a top half and a bottom half. I think the detail on these is not bad. So if you didn't have the photo etch for this, I think this would actually not be too bad. You would just need to drill out behind that material back there so you could get some of the red light coming through. But it does require a little bit of work to prep for these photo etch pieces. You have to cut away what's here in order to get that to fit. And as you can see, I've already done that for this half. So I'll show you how I did that. First of all, you need to build this little box that has the openings in the back for the light to get through, and then it's got some little guidelines for lining up these pieces. So the idea is you just line that up with one of those guidelines and make sure it's parallel to the line and not crooked in this way, so not twisted over this way or that way. So it's nice and straight up and down. And then glue that in place with a little bit of super glue. But if I can get the camera to capture this, the back edge of this piece is going to come in contact with the back edge of this piece and really only contact at a line rather than a surface. There we go. So if you see, so it leaves an angular gap between the two pieces. So there's not much room for glue to grab onto there. And so I don't really like that. So what I've been doing is filing the back edge of this piece so that it has more of that angle. So if we look at this one here that I've already done, you can see that back edge baits up nicely there and doesn't leave a gap. Alright, I've got my 3 fins filed down on the edges. So they've all got that bevel on the back edge. The next part is the trickiest part I've had with this is getting these glued in and getting them straight. Where I'm using CA glue, it really wants, when it grabs, and you can't move anything. So you have to basically get it straight on the first shot. You don't really get another chance. And if it sets crooked, then you just have to break it off, scrape the glue off, and try it again, which I've done quite a few times now. So um, at first I was just trying to like set it there and then let it go without, having it do that and fall over, and then get my glue and then try to touch it without pushing it or pulling it out of position. That was tricky. I tried putting a little bit of some other type of glue on there, some canopy glue, just a tiny spot of it, just to kind of hold it in place long enough for me to get the CA glue on there. And that didn't work as well as I wanted it to. I've tried, holding the fin in one hand and applying glue in the other while trying to keep everything straight. That was quite difficult. The last thing I tried that I think is working okay is I'll just put a little bit of CA glue on a piece of tape, and then I'll just dip this back edge in the CA glue just so there's a tiny little bit on that back edge, and I can line up the bottom edge without it gluing because there's hopefully no glue on the bottom edge. But I get the bottom edge lined up, and then when I think I've got it more or less straight up and down, then I'll touch it to the back, hold it for a few seconds so for the CA glue to grab, and then hopefully it's nice and straight, which most of the time it is. A couple times I've had to redo it, but most of the time I'm using this really the thin glue because it just kind of seeps in around all the edges and in between the parts and doesn't really leave like a big blob behind most of the time. And so it works really well for these photo etch parts. But for this part, I think where I'm going to just lightly touch and hold on, I think something thicker. I've got this gel that I think will work better for that, because the thin stuff, when I try to touch it on there, it just kind of pulls around and even goes up the side where I don't want it. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit of CA glue on there. Just put the tiniest little bit on this edge. Now I'm going to try and do this on camera, which is not going to be easy. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Full disclosure, that did take me a few tries. It's even more difficult to do this on camera than it is off camera. But now that's holding in place, but only in just a couple of spots. So I do want to put some of the thin glue around it to bond all the way around. And so I'll just get a little drop on the end of my glue looper here and touch that. And the thin glue just runs down in between the parts, fills in all the cracks. So I'll go and just hit all four edges that are in contact with between the two parts. Okay, there we go, and that's a nice clean way to do it. If I get any extra blobs, I'll just try and scrape those off after they dry. Okay, got all of them on there. I think I did a pretty good job getting those straight. Okay, the next part is cleaning out the existing plastic to make room for the photo etch piece. So I started by just removing the internal ribs and then just shaving a little bit off both sides. I did want it to be more or less centered, so I tried to take off the same amount on both sides. And I just removed these by using these kind of heavy duty nippers that I have and just biting into these existing fins just a little bit at a time. because you know the nippers will only go back so far. But if I nip into it a little bit, then I can push it back a little bit further the next time. And just kind of worked my way through on this bottom plane here, and then do the same thing on this back plane here. And then, you know, it's messy. It leaves behind a messy edge, but then I come back in and clean that up with a knife and some grinding tools. Cut away about as much as I can with those nippers that I can get to. Now I'll come in with a sharp blade and clean out what's remaining. So I definitely want to clean up this bottom face here to be nice and flush, so the photo etch piece can sit on top of that. But I don't really need to spend any time cleaning up this back face here, because I am going to cut that away so that the red light can get through for the impulse engine. But now that I've got those internal fins cleared, you can see that there's not quite enough space in there to fit the photo etch pieces. So I'm going to have to remove some of the outer fins. To clear out the back face, I'm just using a drill bit to remove some material. I basically want to remove all of it, except for I do want to leave a little bit of a lip here on top, just so that the photo etch has something to rest against and to glue against there. But at the bottom, I've got the whole bottom face for it to rest on down here, so I can clear this out all the way down to that face there. But I don't want to clear out the bottom face at all. I did start to do that on the first one that I did. For whatever reason, I was thinking I would just need to remove all the material to open that up, but then I realized it wasn't going to leave me much material to actually glue the photo etch onto, and so I'd already drilled out those sections before I realized, no, I actually probably want to leave those there, so I have something to glue to. So that's why that one looks a little goofy. But the second one I didn't do that, so this is what I ended up with, just cutting out just the back portion there so that the light can get through. Okay, got that drilled out. I drilled more than I needed to. I was still stuck in the mindset of having to drill out each of those individual things separately, but really I just need to drill a perimeter so I can cut that out. So I got a couple extra holes there that I don't need, but now that I've got those, I can just go in with my heavy duty nippers and just remove that center portion and finish cutting it out with a knife. There we go. I've got this back section here cleaned out. The photo etch assembly fits in there nicely. So now I'll just put a little bit of CA glue on there to hold it in place. And then once the CA glue is set up, then I'll come in the back here and put a little bit of canopy glue just to give it a bit of a stronger bond in a place where that's not going to be seen. Over most of this model, on the primary hull and secondary hull, the panel lines are recessed, as you can see here. And here. However, on the fantail and the pylons, we've got raised panel lines. I want these to be recessed, so I'm going to re-scribe them. You can see I've already done this on the top portion of the fantail. There were just 4 panel lines that were raised. And as you can see, those are now recessed. So let me show you how I do that. First of all, I use the existing raised panel lines as a guide. They're already there and in mostly the right places, but we'll talk about that in a second. And on this model, they're really quite well defined. And so they provide a nice guide for my scribing tool to follow. Now I've got an actual tool that's designed for scribing, this Trumpeter scribing tool, and it's good. It does a great job of putting down a line and removing the material, pulling it out of the model, getting it out of the way. But the lines that it makes are very fine, very narrow, and they're just a little bit too small, a little too out of scale for this Voyager model, especially when compared to the width and depth of the lines on the primary hull. So the existing recess panel lines on this kit are really quite large, and so the lines that would come from this tool are just much finer and wouldn't look right next to these. Instead, on this kit, I'm going to do the same technique that I used on my USS Defiant build. So what I do is I do it in several passes. First, as I use for my first scribing tool, is I use this. It's a pin vise with an actual sewing needle put in. So you can see there, really sharp and hard point at the tip. That's one of the reasons I like this, is how sharp it is. And I just find my smallest collet for my pin vise here, put that in, and I don't want it to be too long because I don't want to end up bending it. I'm going to be putting some force, lateral force on this, and I don't want to bend it too much, so I put it back as far in there as I can go, where the pin vise will still clamp onto it, because the taper on this needle it does go back quite a ways, so I can't go right up to the tip like that. It just won't grab it if I do. So I got to go back. I do have to have it stick out a little bit, about that much. And then, like I said, I'm going to be using the existing raised panel lines as a guide for the most part. Most of them are pretty good. They're in decent enough places. The only real exception is this line right here is pretty crooked for whatever reason. I don't really care for that. So I'm going to go ahead and use the panel lines across this direction as my guides. But then for this one, I'm probably going to have to just remove that raised panel line first before I scribe, and then go back in and scribe it in a, so it's not so crooked. But let me show you first. Oh, I just noticed that those are raised as well. Not sure if those are supposed to be. I'll have to check the reference model to see, because I might need to scribe these as well if they are supposed to be recessed. Okay, so I'm going to start with this line here, and I'm going to start scribing on this upper side of the line as I'm holding it on screen here, because if I were to scribe on the underside of that line, then once the panel line got to that corner, it would kind of jog down and just look weird. Or if I start at the top, it's going to be a more natural just transition to that corner there. So what I do is I start off with very light pressure, enough to make a little bit of a mark in the plastic, but I don't put a lot of pressure on it at first, because if I go off to one side or the other, then I just have a deeper mark that's going to make things harder for me, and I have more control if I'm just got light pressure to start. So I just do multiple passes of light pressure and it just gets a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. And then if there's enough of a groove there that I'm confident the needle is not going to easily skip out, it still can, so I have to be careful, but the deeper it gets, the easier it becomes. And so once I'm confident I can start putting, significant pressure on it to actually start pushing a lot of plastic out of the way, then I'll start doing that. But Another reason I like this needle is because of its shape. It's rounded. Whereas if I were to use something like a knife, it seems that if you put even just a tiny bit of an angle with the knife, it just likes to go off in its own direction, and rather than following the guideline. But with the round shape of the needle, it doesn't really do that. It follows the guideline, and I feel like I have more control over the path that the tool takes. One disadvantage of using the needle for the scribing tool is that rather than removing the material when I push it along the guideline, it just pushes the material out of the way as it goes, and it tends to just pile up into heaps on the side of the line, and then that material has to be removed at some point. So I have to go back over it with another tool to kind of remove those ridges. All right, so let's give this a go. So like I said, I just do really light pressure at first, and I try to do just a little bit of force into the guideline just so that it follows the guideline and doesn't stray off to the side. But I have to be careful not to put too much force so that it pops over the guideline. So it's a little tricky, but like I said, I start off with really light pressure, and I don't worry about the very outer edges since this guideline tapers off at the very edge. I'm not going to worry about going all the way to the edge just yet. I'm going to start where I know it's got a good solid bite on that guideline, and then I'm just going to pull it along as close to parallel to that line as I can. But like I said, with a little bit of force going into the guideline just to keep it on track. And that was really light pressure. You almost can't even see that I made a mark. But if we get the light just right, you can see there's the tiniest hint of a mark there. So I'm just going to do this, just repeat. Go over it lightly. Okay, now there's a bit of a deeper mark there. Start putting a little bit more pressure on it. Okay, I'm going to flip it around and get this little part where it comes off the edge of the panel on this side. If I do find that the tool moves away from the guideline and starts deviating off to one side, I can obviously, stop before I go too far. But now that now that there's a groove off in that direction, if I try to go back over it, the tool tends to want to follow that and just keep making it deeper. So I have to, at that point, turn the part around and go at it from the opposite direction so it can't follow that messed up line. Instead, it just kind of pushes it back into shape to the original line, if that makes sense. I don't really want to mess this one up on purpose to show you, but if I do have that situation, which it comes up now and then, it's not unheard of. So if that comes up again, I'll turn the camera on and show you how that looks. But anyway, so that's looking pretty good. That's about as far as I can go with just the needle tool. Okay, the next step is to, in this case, remove that original grid line. I don't need it anymore. And at this point, in order to clean that panel line out a little bit more, it's just going to get in the way. Now for these other ones, I'm going to want where the grid lines cross each other, I'm going to want to use the needle tool to score out all of those ahead of time before I remove the panel lines, just so I've got all of the lines scribed, but in this case where this one's just out at the end kind of on its own, not interacting with the others, I'm going to go ahead and just show you the whole process on this one. So the next part, so what I do to remove the panel line is I just use this blade, which is a different shape than my normal, I think this is a number, number 10 or 11, I can't remember, something like that. And I just essentially rub that over the panel line and scrape it off, just a little bit at a time. I don't want to gouge any of the panel away from the line, so I have to be careful how, I don't want to put the blade down like this, because then the back edge of the blade, you can see where that's touching the part, that's going to leave a gouge out away from the panel line. Same thing go in this direction. If I'm too sharp of an angle this way, then the tip is going to be beyond the panel line and scratch a mark there. So I want to go as parallel to the surface as I can. And I've got a light behind me, or behind the part here, and I use the light and the shadow of the blade to kind of judge how parallel it is to the surface. So if it's more or less just a straight line of light coming through there, then I'm pretty confident that it's parallel. And so then I'll just run that across. And then I just keep doing that until the line is basically removed and flush with the top surface of the panels. Once I've got that line more or less removed, if it's still a little bumpy, then I can go ahead and sand that down to smooth it out a little bit. But I'll only really do that if I need to. In this case, that came off pretty clean. That looks pretty flat. Okay, now that the original line is removed, next step is to just widen and deepen that panel line a little bit and clear out some of the plastic. So what I like to use for that is this hobby knife. But what's important about this is that it's got a broken tip. See that? Because what I like to use is not the sharp edge of the blade, but actually the back edge of the blade on that broken tip. It's got a nice squared off sharp corner there that I find is really just great for cleaning and gouging out these panel lines. And so, like I said, I get that back edge of the blade, put it into the recessed panel line that I've started, and then I'll kind of hold it at an angle, kind of like that. So, I won't go straight back like that, but I'll hold it at an angle like this and kind of tilt the blade at an angle like that. So I've got that corner digging through there, and it leaves me with kind of like a nice, it kind of gouges everything out into like a V shape, kind of bevels it just a little bit, which helps widen it and remove the material. So I just have to kind of get a feel for it, for the angle. I'll start a little bit, and if it just feels like it's grabbing weird, if it's grabbing weirdly, or trying to hop out of the groove or anything like that, then I'll just kind of adjust it a little bit. So there, it's already a little bit wider. You can see it piles up some plastic right on the top edges of the groove, but that's fine. I'll come back and clean that out in a minute. So usually I do a couple passes going one way, flip it around, and do it a few times the other way. Then once I'm happy with the width and the depth, This next step is to clean up the inside, so I'll make sure it's nice and smooth. There's not like any big chunks of plastic left over on the inside, other than just the debris, which is easy to clean out. And then we've got to get rid of the plastic that's piled up on those top edges. And the way I do that is again with this tool, but I turn the blade even more this way, so I'm almost running that edge rather than the corner along, and that tends to just, if it's running along that top edge, it tends to scrape that material away. And you can tell when you're running it along if it's pulling that material off. It'll come off in little twirls or just little chunks of plastic and leave behind a nice clean edge. See that? That little burr of plastic came off into a little strip there. Right there. There it is. So that edge is definitely cleaner than it was. I might have to do it a couple more times. Definitely here on the corner. Pay a little attention to that corner, but I'm going to flip it around and do the other edge. There you go. See, more of that plastic came off in kind of that little spirally twirl twist of plastic. And left behind a much cleaner edge. Still need to do a couple more passes just to clean that up. I'll do that off camera just because it's hard to do this while filming, and then I do need to just pay attention to these edges here, clean them up a little bit, straighten them out. The only trouble I usually have with this step in the process is that for whatever reason, sometimes when I drag the tool across, it'll start to bounce kind of at a high frequency. It'll chatter across that edge, and it'll leave a chattery pattern on the edge that's kind of visible. I'm not really sure what causes that, if it's just, at a specific angle, or maybe the plastic itself, if there's like a harder spot or a softer spot that I come across, that it just behaves a little differently. It doesn't do that most of the time, but every once in a while I'll hit a patch of that, and whether it's part of the plastic itself or the way I'm holding the blade or whatever, I'm not really sure. But all right, there's my panel line. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so I've scraped off that panel line that I'm going to rescribe, and while I was doing it, I went ahead and rescribed these panel lines, since it was just easy to kind of scrape them all off at once, get it nice and smooth on the top, so I could move on to redoing that crooked line. So as you can see, my technique for doing this is to get some vinyl tape, electrical tape, and line up the edge where I want to scribe a new line. And I like the vinyl tape because it's thick enough that it gives me a good guiding edge to run the scribing tool along without, it doesn't tend to, push it out of the way too much. Obviously, if I put too much pressure on it, then it will push it out of the way, but my technique is just like before, where the first few passes are very light, just until I can get that edge impressed into the plastic a little bit, so that it follows that more than it follows the tape. So here we go. I'm gonna try and do this on camera. It's tricky. Okay, I think that's good enough. I can remove the tape. Okay, there it is. Now I just finish up with the usual process. Alright, I've got all my panel lines re-scribed, and they're now all recessed instead of raised. Of course, the primary and secondary holes were already recessed panel lines, so I didn't have to do any work there. But on the fantail and the warp pylons, I did need to do that. So overall, the result I think it's good. It's a good effect. Definitely is going to be more consistent with the panel lining on the rest of the ship. And yeah, looks good. I'm pleased with that. So that's going to be it for this video. Wanted to show you how everything I did for the photo etching and for the panel lines. In the next video, I'm going to look at some additional customizations I'm going to make to the model. There are some features that I don't quite like that I'm going to adjust, and there are some missing features that I want to add. So we'll take a look at that next time. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.